What happens when the person you trust the most is the one who betrays you the deepest? Can love built on lies ever survive, or is heartbreak inevitable? When love turns to deception and trust shatters like glass, how far would you go to reclaim your power? Is revenge the best form of justice, or does it only create more destruction? What is the actual cost of greed, and can a man outrun the consequences of his sins? Cassandra Akua. Nkrumah believed she had found her soulmate in Brandon Asante, a man of wealth, power, and influence. He showered her with gifts and admiration and whispered promises of forever. But behind the charm lay a master manipulator, a man whose hunger for control knew no bounds. Brandon had spent his life playing the game, pulling the strings, always one step ahead. But what happens when the puppet master becomes the pawn in his own game? Can a man ever truly change, or do they always return to who they really are? And in a world where power is everything, what happens when the mighty finally fall? As you step into this story of betrayal and retribution, ask yourself, if someone shattered your world, would you walk away, or would you make them pay? Cassie and Brandon seemed like a perfect couple. He showered Cassie with gifts, admiration, and promises of a future together. To the world, they were a power couple, inseparable, unstoppable. Cassie believed she had found her soulmate. For a moment, Brandon was everything Cassie had ever prayed for. Brandon Asante was wealthy, powerful, and dangerously charming. He was a successful businessman who inherited his wealth through his family's construction company, which had been in operation for 3 generations. Brandon has lived all his life in riches and affluence in Akosombo, attended elite school, and toured the world. When he came of age, he took over his father's company. He married his high school sweetheart, who was equally from an affluent home, and they had 2 kids, a boy and a girl. Brandon seemed like the perfect man, but beneath the facade of perfection lay deception. His business was doing well, but he always yearned for more. He was cheating business partners out of deals and covering up with his strong political connections. He was conniving and very cunning. Part of the great business success he got was from illicit deals that were properly covered up. Cassandra Akua Nkrumah, on the other hand, was known for her striking beauty, intelligence, and grace. She had grown up in a small village in the Ashanti region of Ghana, where she was raised by a loving family. Cassie's parents instilled in her the values of honesty, integrity, and hard work, but the spirit of ambition indeed fueled her. She wanted more for her life than what her village could offer. So she moved to Accra in search of opportunity, determined to make a name for herself. Her beauty, along with her sharp mind, quickly made her a sought-after figure in the city. Cassie worked her way up in the fashion world, first as a designer and later as a businesswoman. Her career flourished, and with it, her reputation. Success followed her everywhere she went. She had worked hard and built a high and sophisticated clientele. She worked in advertising and branding, so she was always in touch with business executives. She attended a business workshop in Dubai, and that was where she met Brandon Asante. Brandon initially thought she was there to represent her boss since she looked pretty young to own a business. Cassie, who was there to network and get more clients, did not hesitate to introduce herself and hand over her business card. Brandon was amazed by her achievement. He did a little digging on her and found out that she was running one of the leading advertising firms in the country. And as expected, he wanted to exploit her company for the benefit of his company. He went on to pursue her and did all he could to win her. He even lied about his marital status just to win her over. Brandon had always been a Casanova. He had met and had affairs with numerous women, whom he had promised a happy future together, only to discard them after getting what he wanted. Some women lost everything and hit rock bottom because they were blackmailed out of even thinking of going after him. Cassie was just another successful woman on his hit list, but she thought she had met Mr. Right. The two dated for about 6 months, and Cassian began asking where they were headed with the relationship, but each time he would say, "My dear, let's live in the moment, for tomorrow will take care of itself. And we don't know tomorrow, only God does. If it is His will for us to be together, we will end up together. If I had all the power in the world, you would be my wife right now." Some of the answers didn't make sense to Cassie, but she didn't give a second thought about them. She had given her all to the relationship. She had a pure heart with good intention and assumed everyone was like her. She trusted Brandon, and so she didn't doubt his love for her for a second, especially when she thought of how he treated her and how that made her feel. But as with most things in life, appearances can be deceiving. Brandon traveled to Akosombo to see his family. He had lied to Cassie about the trip, saying, "I'm attending a stakeholders conference that would last a week." Brandon had taken similar trips throughout their relationship, so it wasn't new to her. Unknown to Cassie, he had returned 2 days earlier than he was supposed to with a woman. On the evening he was supposed to return, Cassie planned a romantic surprise for him at his home. At the door, she heard a soft, intimate whisper coming from the house. When she got in, it was coming from the direction of the bedroom. At first, she dismissed it as a business call, but reality crashed down upon her as she approached. There he was, in the arms of another woman. Her breath caught in her throat as she listened to the same words of love he had once spoken to her, now whispered to someone else. Her world shattered. She turned away, unseen and unheard, but forever changed. Cassie sat in her car, frozen in shock. For a moment, she wished it was just a bad dream that she could wake up from. At that moment, the truth crashed down on her. The man she had loved, the man she had trusted, had been betraying her all along. For days, she was lost in her emotions. Betrayal tore at her heart like a relentless storm. She had spent years building her career and had made Brandon a central part of her life. The thought that he could so easily deceive her was incomprehensible. Her pride, once unshakable, was shattered, and she realized that she had given him everything: her love, her trust, and her ambition. Yet he had taken it all for granted. She tried to confront him, but Brandon denied everything. He claimed that the woman she had seen him with was simply a business associate who had come to him with an urgent matter. Cassie didn't believe him. "Of course, and that is why you were in her arms, in your room, in your bed," Cassie muttered. Brandon fumbled but couldn't come up with any reasonable excuse. He gaslighted her for making up things in her mind, blaming her for not trusting him enough to believe his explanation. But Cassie was too smart for all those cock and bull stories. The lies, the manipulation, the sweet words, they meant nothing now. The man she had thought she loved was nothing but a master of deception. Her heart hardened, and the seed of revenge began to take root. Cassie had always been a woman of strategy. Instead of wallowing in self-pity like others would do, she decided to outsmart him. She would make him pay for the betrayal, but not with violence or anger. She would play the game and make him feel the consequences of his actions in a way that would leave him utterly defeated. As a woman of strategy, she felt a sense of empowerment born out of her heart, and she wasn't going to let him get away with it. Her plan for revenge had already begun to take shape in her mind. With grace, intelligence, and precision, she began poking at Brandon's ego, which was his most vulnerable point. The man had built his reputation on pride. Cassie would break him slowly, piece by piece, with his weaknesses. She would ensure that every decision he made from now on would have consequences, and in doing so, she would show him the price of betrayal. Cassie's first move was to leverage the network of people she had carefully cultivated over the years. She wasn't just a successful fashion designer and businesswoman. She was a woman who had deep connections within the business and social elite of Accra. Many didn't know that Cassie had also befriended several wealthy and influential women, some of whom had previously dated Brandon before she came into the picture. They too had been hurt by Brandon's reckless charm and lies, though none of them had dared confront him directly. They were also looking for justice, and Cassie realized she would find her allies in this shared betrayal. The women, discarded and forgotten by Brandon in the past, became key to Cassie's plan. They had knowledge of Brandon's tendencies, his weaknesses, and the darker aspects of his life that no one else knew about. Over time, Cassie subtly reconnected with these women, bringing them back into her fold. Together, they were a quiet force, united in their shared pain and willing to take down the man who had once been their muse and now their enemy. These women shared secrets about Brandon's business dealing, personal failing, and lack of commitment. They began to piece together a new narrative about who Brandon really was, and Cassie saw an opportunity to strike. Brandon's reputation had been built on trust and respect. He had presented himself as a pillar of success, admired by his peers and clients. He was known to speak well, often giving speeches about integrity, power, and the importance of family. What Cassie saw, however, was the man behind the mask, a man whose promises were as empty as his actions. She began to plan an exposure, a public reveal of everything that Brandon had hidden from the world, not just his infidelity, but also his dishonesty, disloyalty, and lack of integrity. His public image was crucial to his power, and Cassie knew that destroying it would ruin him more than anything else. Cassie carefully began to leak details of Brandon's lies to the press, subtly planting stories about his unfaithfulness, broken promises, and deceitful behavior toward business partners. She didn't need to scream her accusations. She needed to provide enough information to make others question him. She made sure that the stories were compelling enough to stir doubt without making it too apparent that she was behind it all. Through anonymous letters, interviews with former associates, and small hints in gossip circles, whispers about Brandon's true nature began to emerge. His exaggerated success was suddenly questioned. People started asking how he accumulated wealth, and his personal life began to be seen as disjointed and untrustworthy. The first sign that Cassie's plan was working came when Brandon lost a key contract with the government. He had been in line to build a massive development project that would have secured his dominance in the real estate market for years to come. However, his reputation had been tarnished. The government official who had once trusted him now questioned his integrity. They began to pull back from the deal, citing undisclosed issues with his past projects. Brandon was furious. He had worked so hard to gain the trust of this official, but now his shadowed past was coming to haunt him. Things began to snowball for Brandon. Cassie's whispers of betrayal reached other business people who had once considered him a reliable partner. They started pulling their investments from his companies, and soon his financial empire began to crumble. But the actual blow came when Brandon's biggest ally, Tariq, decided to cut ties. Tariq had once been a loyal friend who believed in Brandon's vision, but the information Cassie leaked about Brandon's financial misconduct and exploitation was too much to ignore. Tariq walked away from the partnership, and this was the final nail in Brandon's coffin. As his businesses fell apart, Brandon began to lose everything. The lavish parties, the expensive cars, and the high-profile connections that had once defined him now seemed like distant memories. His former friends turned their backs on him, and his social standing evaporated. The man who had once confidently walked the streets of Accra was now a shadow of his former self. But the most brutal blow was still to come. Brandon's personal life. As his businesses crumbled, so did his marriage. Essie, his wife, left him. She couldn't bear to be around him any longer, and with the mounting pressure of the public scandal, she took their children and walked out the door. Brandon was alone. He had spent so many years focused on his success that he had neglected the people who mattered most. His own greed had destroyed his once perfect life, and now he had no one left to turn to. As the days passed and the world watched Brandon's empire crumble, the once invincible businessman lived a nightmare. The public's perception of him had shifted from admiration to disdain. His once successful construction ventures, real estate deal, and influence in Accra's high society were now nothing but empty shells, mocking reminders of a past that had been built on lies. Brandon's business partners had abandoned him. The media had torn him apart, exposing his affair, his deceitful practices, and his manipulation of everyone around him. He had lost the respect of his clients, and his reputation as a man of integrity had been destroyed. But the worst part wasn't the loss of money or the business collapse. It was the fact that he had lost everything that truly mattered: the people who once loved him, and the person who had trusted him the most. Cassie had become a shadow in his life, the woman who had once been his partner, now his tormentor. Brandon's mind was clouded with regret, self-loathing, and anger. His thoughts often wandered back to Cassie, to the moments they shared when he had promised her a future. He recalled the grand gestures, the dream of building an empire together. All she had ever wanted was for him to be honest with her, faithful, and value their partnership. But he had disrespected her in the worst possible way, believing that his wealth, power, and charm could protect him from the consequences of his actions. "What have I done?" Brandon whispered to himself, his voice breaking. He could barely recognize the man in the mirror anymore. Everything he had built, everything he had worked so hard for, was now in ruin. His business was falling apart, and he had lost his family, the one thing that could have given him redemption. He thought about Essie, his wife, who had left him with their children. Essie had been his anchor, the one person who had always stood by him despite his flaws. And yet he had taken her love for granted. He had pushed her away, believing that his success would be enough to keep her by his side. But he had been wrong. His wealth meant nothing to her if it was built on deceit. Determined to find a way out, Brandon began to reach out to the people he had wronged, starting with Cassie. He knew it would take more than an apology. He needed to prove his sincerity. He needed to show her that he was a man who had indeed changed, someone who no longer prioritized power and greed over love and integrity. But Cassie was no longer the same woman he had once known. His action had hurt her, and though she might still have some part of her that cared for him, she was no longer the naive woman who had believed in his promises. Brandon understood this now, but realized that if he ever hoped to redeem himself, it would be through his actions, not words. He reached out to Essie, begging for a chance to make things right. "Essie, please, I know I was wrong, I was selfish, I hurt you, but I am not the same man I was." It was difficult for Essie to even look at him after everything he had put her through. The pain of betrayal was still fresh in her mind. Yet, when she looked into his eyes, she saw something she hadn't seen before: genuine remorse. Brandon had finally started to understand the gravity of his actions. He knew that earning her forgiveness would take time and would not come easily. Still, he was willing to fight for it. Slowly, Essie allowed him to prove himself, not by grand gestures, but through consistent change and honesty. The first step toward rebuilding his reputation began with Brandon coming clean about his past. He started by publicly admitting his wrongs. He went on interviews and released statements apologizing for his mistakes and explaining how his greed had led him astray. People were initially skeptical, but Brandon's sincerity began to shine through over time. Brandon knew that he could never restore everything he had lost. His business empire was beyond repair, and many people he had once called friends were long gone. But he wasn't trying to regain all of it. He was trying to find peace within himself and rebuild a life based on the values he had abandoned. Brandon's journey toward redemption was not an easy one. It was filled with setbacks, self-doubt, and struggles to atone for his past mistakes. He had lost everything, but he found a more profound sense of self-awareness in the process. His reputation was forever tarnished, and his wealth was no longer a source of pride. However, Brandon discovered that true wealth didn't come from money or status. It came from integrity, humility, and the love of those who truly cared for you. By the end of his journey, Brandon had lost the trappings of his old life, but he had gained something far more valuable: the peace of mind from owning his mistakes and seeking redemption. In the end, Brandon's story became one of transformation, from a man consumed by greed to one who acknowledged his flaws and worked to change. Whether or not he could ever fully repair the relationships he had lost, he had at least taken the first step toward becoming someone who could look himself in the mirror without shame. His story was one of reckoning, a reminder that sometimes the path to redemption is long and painful, but it is never truly out of reach if a man is willing to confront his flaws and make amends. Thank you for watching. We hope you enjoyed the story and learned something new. If you did, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more amazing tales from the heart of Africa. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an adventure. Until next time, stay curious, stay inspired, and keep the spirit of storytelling alive. See you in the next video. Bye.